Hey, Steve, great to be with you today. Thanks for spending some time with me. We were talking a little before we hopped on. Very interesting beginnings from a sales perspective. I think you have some experience that, first off, some of your first sales experience, but then also how you got to where you are today, kind of a non-traditional background. But then again, a lot of times when I talk to sellers, they have a very interesting backstory. But I'd love to hear yours. How did you what were some of your humble beginnings, and then how did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. And so one of the things kind of reflecting on that is that in high school, for me, when I was in high school, eBay had just come out. And so, I was really into video games at the time. And so I wanted a way to just sell my old video games so selfishly I could get new video games. So I got into eBay. I started selling my old video games just so that I could get money to buy new video games. And my parents were awesome in the sense that they gave me a lot of different avenues to try to explore. And so through that, I found out I actually really enjoyed kind of the marketing of that and writing up the descriptions for how I was selling these things. I ended up actually then turning that into a consignment business where I would then go to yard sales in the area and I would find things that I could buy that I thought I could sell for more on eBay. And because eBay was so new at the time, people were buying stuff actually at a pretty high rate compared to what you could do elsewhere. And so I would then start scanning different yard sales for typically towards the end of the day, people just wanted to get rid of the stuff. And they would literally just give me boxes and say, here you go, here's a box of books. I would then just sell that. I would put that online. And now there's this wide audience of people that could potentially buy that. And so I started doing that. I then turned that into, I would approach people and say, look, I will sell this for you if I can take a small commission on the sale. So now I had a consignment business that I was doing. And I had created the name, I called it Trash to Cash. And I had business cards I had actually printed out on these little, business card templates that you could get at the time. And so it was just a really fun experience because it taught me marketing, it taught me customer service, it taught me how to kind of position different things. And these were not high volume transactions that I was dealing with, but I think it gave me a lot of really cool life lessons.
Yeah.
Fast forward to college, I did a very technical background. So I did math and computer science. And I did not even think that sales was something for me. I was an introvert, so I did not really like to do public speaking. In fact, the one course I did pretty poorly at in college was my first freshman year course of communication and public speaking, just because I was so anxious about that I could not get past that to then be effective in terms of speaking. So I did the 4 years of college in a technical background. I then started working for a small startup company, also pursuing a master's in computer science. So still kind of staying on that technical track. For about 10 years, I did consulting for various different software development opportunities. And then at some point, I just felt like I wanted to do something different. I had kind of reached this point in software development that I felt like all of the problems effectively were feeling the same. I kind of dealt with the same kinds of problems and the same kinds of customers. I just wanted to try something new. Also, at the same time, I looked at when I would go to the internal conferences at Microsoft or go to these large conferences, the people I looked up to were the people that could really effectively speak well. And I knew that was something for me that I needed to get better at. And so over that period, I was working to try to get myself out there, trying to do things at conferences, trying to do things at meetup groups, and trying to improve kind of my public speaking. And at the end of kind of that period when I was doing consulting, somebody I had worked with told me about a technical sales role that opened up at Microsoft. And while it was not software development, it was for Power BI, which is our analytics and kind of reporting tooling. I looked at that as a really cool opportunity just for me to try to explore taking that public speaking to the next level. And I ended up loving it. And so I've been doing that for about the last 4 years in terms of technical sales at Microsoft. And that's really how I got into sales. It was not intentional in the sense that, from when I went to college, I knew that I wanted to be in business and I knew I wanted to be in sales. I just knew that I liked solving problems at college and I knew the kinds of things I liked. And that ended up getting me to Microsoft, but then that ultimately led me to where I'm at now. And I just took a leadership role, so I'm now managing a team of technical specialists at Microsoft for our federal practice. And it's been awesome. It's been a really cool experience. And it's kind of given me this ability to start doing the things that I really enjoy. And And it's not that thing that I thought going into starting my career is where I would get to, but I'm really happy where I'm at now.
What I always find fascinating, Steve, about people's journey, and not just, career journey, not even just sales journey, just life journey. What I always find fascinating is the pieces that you pick up and that you assimilate as part of your process throughout life. You obviously harkened back to some early memories of ways that you were able to leverage some marketing principles. Simple supply and demand, right? A relatively new platform at the time, eBay. I spent a lot of time on eBay at the time buying stuff that I probably didn't need. But the point being that there was a new opportunity, something you could jump on and capitalize. And it's about the fundamentals, really, because the dollar numbers don't always matter. I mean, you and I probably work with a lot bigger, things that'll have a lot more zeros behind them now than we did 10, 20 years ago.
Sure.
But the fundamentals are often the same. And you highlighted a lot of those. How do you understand, where there is a need? How do you understand how to market and create audience? Go out and meet them where they are, and be sure to deliver and follow through on commitments. I think all of these things are fundamental when it comes to selling. I also found it very interesting, some of the background that you had. I've told my story. Mine's not as ambitious as yours. I really didn't know what I wanted to do, and I, kind of meandered through getting a business degree in college because it was the thing that when I was a junior, I had was the closest to having the most credits to. I didn't have any idea what I wanted to do, but I love that you were fascinated by and followed math and science because they play so much into the selling realm. It's ironic because I was watching the movie Moneyball not too long ago, and I love that film because it really speaks to how I look at a lot of the sales components. There's a lot of relationship, but there's also a lot of data and understanding, how things work, how you can increase your probability of success in certain things. What would you say are some of the things that you picked up maybe early on with some of your experiences, or even just through the journey that you took through pursuing math and science in school, and then your technical acumen? What helps you the most today?
I think a couple of things. So, for me, once again, I took a math degree only because I just knew in high school that's one of the things I was better at. I could not really, for history or for English, I couldn't really sit down and just read a novel and then, be be effective at that. And math was always the thing that was pretty good. And that's kind of how I got into it in college. Now, math and computer science, I think the thing that I took away from that is just problem solving. So in many of those classes, you're given problems where you can't just go into Bing and search an answer and try to get what it is, right? You have to be able to fundamentally try to solve that and step through that and kind of show your work. But I do think just that thought process and that logical kind of thing that taught me over the 4 years was really awesome. And so when I now translate that into sales now, it's thinking about, okay, in terms of positioning things that we're trying to sell, or in terms of trying to build different things that are the kinds of solutions that we're trying to position. I do think that logical and that kind of like that reasoning that I learned from math and computer science is effective. The second thing to that is computer science specifically for me, programming. I think the thing that was really helpful for me is that as we're selling software, I have a better appreciation for how that's built and kind of under the covers and how to integrate with that. The other thing I think it gives me, at least, because then I had 10 years of experience doing software development, doing consulting. When I meet with product development teams, I feel like I have better empathy for what they're dealing with because I did that for 10 years. And so whenever I have the opportunity to speak to product groups, I always look at it like, how would I have felt in this situation? And I do feel like that's given me a greater sense of empathy to really kind of lean in and to truly understand kind of where they're at. And what are the things that they probably want to hear to make sure they feel heard?
I would imagine that would go a long way. I would be curious because I'm sure you have a lot of connections that are technical, by nature, and maybe some of them are considering, do I parlay this into a sales career?
Yeah.
What advice would you give them?
I would give them a few things, so if you think that you really enjoy or want to be more into public speaking, or you just want to meet with a lot of different people, the technical sales route is an amazing opportunity. And what I mean by that is that I think that in general, this is probably just a stereotype, but in general, people that are more technical, the people that are developers, probably have a weird connotation to sales, right? But I think a lot of it is they just don't understand actually how it works, right? And they've never actually kind of leaned in and talked to somebody that does that. But what I would say is that I still get to be very technical. The difference is that I get to meet with a ton of different people, and that's the thing I really enjoy. I meet with CTOs and CIOs. I meet with developers. I meet with business analysts. And to me, that's kind of the fun because it keeps things interesting and it keeps things changing. As a developer, what would happen is I would be on a project for 6 months, a year, and it just lost kind of its appeal because the things that I found interesting, once I figured that out, I was there for a year and it just wasn't something that got me lit up to get up and kind of go into my job every day. In the sales side, on a technical perspective, I still get to be technical, but every day is totally different. And that's the thing that I really enjoy. And I just feel like I've learned so much more over the last 4 years in my sales experience than I did necessarily as a consultant doing software development, because I felt like I was doing the same problems over and over, right? I relived kind of the same year for about 10 years. Whereas now, like over the last 4 years, I've done a lot of different things and I feel like it's given me a lot of exposure that I wouldn't have got otherwise.
I like that. What I find fascinating about sales, Steve, is you hit on this earlier, is there's typically a connotation, right? And when you hear the word sales, it can be rather intimidating for somebody who's not in it, for somebody who's being sold to or has been sold to, especially the wrong way. There's certainly a connotation of selling, and that's why great sellers differentiate themselves. But the mold is so different. I look at sales very similarly to sports. There's role players, and it's the prototypical leadoff hitter and the cleanup hitter are going to look completely different from one another. So great sellers can look very different from one another as well. You obviously have to have somebody that can create a relationship, that can invest in that relationship, can understand all of the resources that they have to bring to bear. But a lot of it is the communication element, as you nailed, and then maintaining that relationship and nurturing that relationship over time, being an advocate and an evangelist for your brand. And anybody can do that. Anybody can fit that mold. And I think that's the beauty of selling, is that somebody with a very technical acumen, you just hit on all of those key relationships that they may have some nuanced angle or perspective about that somebody with a non-technical background like me, I wouldn't have inherently. I think that there is a confidence that is projected sometimes by certain types of sellers. Some of it's false, some of it's fake, some of it's a lot of bluster. I've seen some very confident acting sellers in my day, but underneath there wasn't a whole lot there that really maybe warranted that level of confidence. But when you can walk in with that technical know-how and you can forge some of these relationships that maybe historically we don't do a good job of owning those relationships, there's a lot of value there.
Yeah.
When we were talking previously, I know we exchanged some communications leading up to today. It struck me some of the interesting parallels in our career now, but for totally different reasons. So when we both joined Microsoft, I know that we were both kind of overwhelmed by the talent that we were surrounded by. It was amazing to me how many just brilliant people I was coming into contact with on a regular basis. And look, I had been in sales for a long period of time, but I had no technical chops. My background was in advertising and telecommunications. I had no business being here on paper, right? But I stuck with it. I endured through it. I found a way to do it that was different than most. And I took a risk based on two fundamentals. One, building a community around everything that I was doing, something that was engaging people. Yep. And then also I tried to do it at scale. How could I find ways to kind of build an engine that would reach out to an audience, inform them, and keep this thing going, stay top of mind. And it worked. I leveraged a variety of platforms to do it, and I developed a brand for being able to do that, and it served me very well. But it didn't start out super easy. I had very little confidence in the early going, even despite past successes. And I understand you've got an interesting story as well, and kind of how you started. You alluded to a little bit of it earlier, but I'd love to hear kind of your early going, your thoughts. What were you facing, and how did you ultimately turn that into your superpower?
Yeah, so thank you. So when I joined Microsoft, it was 2010. I had up until that point about 2 years in my professional career after college. And so when I took the opportunity at Microsoft, I became a consultant with Microsoft Consulting Services doing software development. And so when I took the opportunity for Microsoft, I honestly did not realize just what the magnitude of that meant. And what I mean by that is that 2 months later, after I got my job, at the time, Consulting Services did a thing called MSSU, Microsoft Services University. Everybody that was starting in that period all around the world flew out to Redmond for 2 weeks to have like a deep dive training on what does it mean to be a consultant at Microsoft. So I get there. There's 120 people in my cohort. And very quickly, I realized that everybody else around me is way smarter than me, way more competent, can speak way better than I can. And they just had this confidence. And I clearly lacked that. And it hit me like a brick wall because all of a sudden for the next 2 weeks, we were doing all these trainings and all these different activities. And I kept hitting this anxiety and it was crippling because I could not get past that feeling that I was not at the right level that I needed to. The second night, I called my parents and told them, I think I made a mistake. I don't belong here. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm nervous. And I will just say that like I'm really glad that I fought through that. Now that 2 weeks was tough. The next few years got better, but I will say that after that I had a great manager. We talked together. We had a game plan of specifically things that I needed to work on. One was public speaking, and that was the journey that I then worked on for the next like 8 years or so until I kind of switched over to sales. And it was not, this linear progression where it got better and better. There were ups. There were downs. I felt like I was getting better. And then at one point, about 3 years into it, I spoke to an audience of about 70 people. I had just done a red-eye flight from Seattle back to the DC area. So, there were a couple things that were not in my favor, but still, I got about 10 minutes into the session and just started feeling cold, clammy, lightheaded. I told the audience that I had to sit down for a second. Somebody was kind enough to get me like a Snickers bar just so I could get some sugar really quickly. I got back up and then I spoke for the next 20, 30 minutes or so, but it was not a great experience. But what I would say is I kept fighting through that and I kept getting myself into places where I knew I was just a little uncomfortable because I knew that was going to keep kind of growing me professionally. I then, started doing speeches at different conferences. I was able to speak at our DC Ignite with over 170 developers live, which was really cool. The other thing with that is I was mentoring somebody at the time, so I was able to bring her into that presentation as well. And so it's something that, I am really proud of because it was not an easy thing. I also think for me, looking back on that, is that it gives me a greater appreciation for kind of where I've come from and where I'm at today, and something that I do now genuinely enjoy. But I just share that with you, and I want to share that with other people too, that if you're dealing with that, you are not alone, and there are things you can do to improve. And there's lots of things. I mean, little things like I'll read books to my daughter, but I'll practice, right? Like, how would I do this if I were speaking to 150 people? It's a great learning opportunity. And so I think that there's a lot of different things that you can do to get better at that. And the last thing that I'll just touch on with that is, my daughter, she's 4. One of her friends a few months ago had a birthday party. It was a karate themed birthday party. So one of the things they did is there was a line of kids and everybody got an opportunity if they wanted to break a board. And so my daughter said, Daddy, I'm nervous. And I told her, I said, I believe in you. You can absolutely do this. She was nervous about it. She got to it. She was the only kid that was 4 that actually broke the board with her hand versus with her foot. And this is that board that she broke right here. And looking back for me with public speaking specifically, I look at it like I was breaking bigger and bigger boards with each thing. It started out small, right? Where I was maybe speaking to 5 people, maybe speaking to 10 people, but I slowly built myself up and got myself to a place where at least now I'm a lot more comfortable with it.
That's powerful. Steve, first off, I appreciate you sharing it because it's not something that I think inherently a lot of us do or sometimes want to do is talk about some of those uncomfortable scenarios. But, as we often like to say, the things that challenge you most are the things that grow you the most. Mm-hmm. And, look, I've been in similar situations. I started in sales 20 years ago, and I remember vividly having the conversation with my parents saying, I made a mistake. There's no way I can do this. No way. It was grueling. It was a scenario where even in our training class of 12 people, I was at AT&T at the time, and all but two, myself and another person, retreated to a prior place because they were from inside the company and they went back to an old job.
Oh, wow.
And I was from off the street. I had nowhere to go. I could have gone back to the grocery store and worked there full time, but obviously, my goal was to get into AT&T, and at the time Southwestern Bell, and it was very daunting for me. But I hung in there, and endurance is a key trait that will serve you well. I used to think that there were a lot of other elements that would serve you super well in sales, like, obviously communication skills, ability to build relationships. And yes, those things are all very important, but perseverance is key. And being able to push through, pay your dues, do those challenging things that make you more comfortable in ambiguous situations. Look at the last 2 years. It's been probably the most ambiguous, uncomfortable, uncertain time you could ever possibly imagine. And I think a lot of us could probably share stories about how challenging it's been for each of us personally, for people that we know, et cetera. But it's experiences like that, and it's the ability and willingness to acknowledge it. That's where it all starts. I still get nervous when I get on and have big interviews or big conversations with folks. I do my best not to show it, but it absolutely happens every single time. And that's the key element, is that ability to, you go back and you kind of think about, why am I doing this? Why is it important to me? Why is it important to the people that I'm doing this with and for? And then some of those types of things can help you kind of see that the light at the end of the tunnel type, proverbially, and drown out those feelings of doubt. They never completely go away, but they do get better over time. And I really appreciate you sharing your story.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I think the difference too is that, yes, like I still get super nervous too, but I know how to deal with it. And I think that's the difference, right? Is just kind of recognizing that and kind of having whatever your process is to deal with that.
Yeah, one of my favorite visions, and we'll be watching it soon because every Valentine's Day, my wife and I watch the movie For Love of the Game with Kevin Costner. It's the old baseball movie. And there's these scenes where he's standing on the mound and, he's in Yankee Stadium pitching, right? And he's got this thing he does called Clear the Mechanism. And it's like he drowns out all the crowd and the booing and the chanting, et cetera. And that's what I liken it to. But even for him, there is a scene, no spoilers. I mean, the movie's been out 20 plus years, so I'm hoping I don't spoil anything. But there is a scene later in the film where it doesn't work. So what do you do then? You just muddle through it sometimes. And that's what we do. We do the best we can. So great stuff. We got, a couple minutes left. Anything else that you want to touch on, Steve, before we sign off?
I would say a couple of things. So just specific to public speaking, I would just say if anybody has any questions or they just want somebody to reach out to talk, I would be happy to do that. So if they want to reach out on LinkedIn, please, absolutely, I would love to have that conversation. And then, I just want to say thank you again for kind of the opportunity to kind of chat with you today. I really enjoyed that. And I look forward to kind of having conversations in the future too.
Pleasure's mine, and likewise. Something else that I thought was interesting, I know you created a YouTube channel to to continue to develop some of the things that you've highlighted during our chat today. I did the same thing, and it was kind of on a whim about 11 years ago. And what I think is fascinating is that both of us are introverts by nature. You probably wouldn't know it to see me, to hear me, but that's the thing. It's I feel comfortable in certain mediums. But I think the key element is that we saw something of value that we could go out and create and do. And I talk to people a lot that they say, I would love to write a book, or I'd love to do a blog, or I'd love to do a vlog, one of these new words that my teenager taught me, or I'd love to, go out and do some of these videos, but I don't know what I would do, or I don't know what I would say, here's the thing, like a lot of these conversations for me just kind of started on a whim. And you never know the value that can come out of those when you put content out in the world, the connections that you can make. I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you if it wasn't for some of the videos and interviews that I've been able to do previously. And I'm amazed every day at some of the people that I've been able to connect with all over the world as a result. And so the reward it's well worth it. It doesn't have to be perfect. Trust me, I've done videos that had more dislikes than likes. I've done, blogs that nobody read.
Mhm.
But at the end of it, the reward for me is the relationships, and I appreciate the opportunity to connect with you as well. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, a couple things actually. So that brought up a couple of things. So yes, I did start a YouTube channel, and that was like a lot of fun. And to your point, I think what's neat is you can put those things out in the world, and just people that you would never have found otherwise can connect with you. And I think that's great. Something we're actually doing on my sales team, my technical sales team, is we actually put a public GitHub repository out there. So we serve the US federal market. And so we're putting business application solutions out in the open on the GitHub repository. And we look at that as kind of a cool way to build this community in this weird kind of digital virtual age of COVID. We're also combining that with YouTube videos. So in some of these cases, we'll have demos and solutions out there, and then we'll have videos that just kind of showcase what are the things that we're trying to show off. And one of the things that we've learned is A, it's kind of neat because it builds this community, but B, it also gives people the time on their own time to learn about our stuff. I find that, at least for me personally in COVID, while I'm not driving, I'm not commuting, I feel like everybody's schedule is just hyper compressed now. And any ability that we can do to give customers what I call more asynchronous time, meaning like they don't need to be in the meeting directly, I do think is beneficial. And so that is something that we're exploring, and it is something that we've tried over the last 6 months. But I do think it's going to be pretty neat to kind of see where that goes.
Love that. And I'm just going to say, I mean, the longer I live, the more I realize time is certainly our greatest asset and resource.
Yeah.
So love the way you're thinking. And it's amazing to me to watch just the journey over the last couple of years, the needs that have come out of the pandemic that we're in or have been in, and just some of the new things that technology has enabled, ways that we can connect genuinely,
Yeah.
and ways that we can actually enhance the work that we do with customers, the sales process, everything. It's been fascinating to watch, especially being in sales as long as I have, and I'm sure you feel similarly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
Very good. Well, hey, Steve, my favorite part of this was you sharing the story about your daughter, and for anybody watching this, let's believe in yourself, and let's go out and let's all crush our proverbial boards today.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, thank you again, Carson. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Steve.
All right, take care.